Good afternoon, and welcome to Talks at Google in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today, it's my privilege to introduce two extraordinary individuals, Professor Lani Guinier and Dr. Deborah Bial. Among many other things, both are fierce advocates of equal educational opportunity for all. Deborah Bial was a MacArthur Fellow in 2007. She is an education strategist who addresses the challenges of college access for underrepresented populations by identifying and fostering latent talent and opening opportunities for them to pursue higher education. Through her Posy Foundation, which is funded in part by Google, she offers an alternative model for identifying promising young people from less advantaged urban environments. Promising students are invited to join a posse, a small group that participates in an 8-month pre-collegiate training program that builds individual and team skills and serves as an essential social support system once students arrive at college. She served as the founder and president of the Posy Foundation since 1989. She's also a founding partner of the consulting company Firefly Education, LLC. Lani Guinier is the first woman of color appointed to a tenured professorship at Harvard Law School. Previously, she had been a tenured professor at the University of Pennsylvania. A lawyer with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, special assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights during the Carter administration, and was nominated by President Clinton to be the first black woman to head the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Professor Guinier, on behalf of the people of the United States, I apologize for how that went. Sincerely. She is the author of several books, most recently, The Tyranny of the Meritocracy, Democratizing Higher Education in America. And she has received 10 honorary degrees, although I suspect that she feels equally honored to have received awards for teaching excellence from both Penn and Harvard Law Schools. Please join me in welcoming in conversation Lani Guinier and Deborah Bial.
We're just winging this, you guys, but not really. We're acting like we are, but. So I'm Debbie Bial. I run the Posy Foundation, and
I'm Lani Guinier, and I'm a law professor who is very fond of the Posy Foundation.
We're fond of each other. We really are, actually. I admire Lani enormously, and this is the first time that we've actually come together to talk about an issue that we've been dealing with separately for decades. And what I am so grateful to Lani for is that she has written extensively about an issue that this country doesn't talk enough about. And that is the idea that the country was built on, which is that we're supposed to be a meritocracy. And I work a lot. I work with 52 different colleges and universities, all elite. And those institutions are really gatekeepers for young people who want to achieve the American dream. And Lani has written a lot about that, and you validate what we do at Posy. And I'll talk more about that, but I wanted to thank you because it's an honor to be here.
Oh, wow.
With you. So.
Well, I'll just be quiet and I'll let you talk. No, it's a privilege to be here. I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to and work with one of the former Posy officers, Shirley Collado.
Right, and she was a Posy member.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and she's the one who really explained to me what it was like to be a Posy member. And I mean, her story is so powerful because she's the she's the daughter of a taxi driver who was somebody who had come to the United States from another country. And her father was extremely worried that she was going to leave New York City to go to Vanderbilt, which is in Tennessee. And so they arranged an agreement that she would call him or he would call her every day. He's a taxi driver at 9 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, and she'd have to report to him as to what she was doing. And it turned out initially that she thought this was intrusive, but it turned out to be very powerful in a way of reassuring her, because she was in a new environment completely without coming in with old friends or with people who've been there before. And so the fact that she had somebody to look forward to talk to every night was very affirming for her. She ended up doing extraordinarily well. She ended up getting a PhD. She's now, I'm not sure exactly of her position at Rutgers, but she's in a high position.
Executive Vice Chancellor, yeah.
Okay, Executive Vice Chancellor, okay, who used to rely on her taxi cab father to move on to the next day of her life. So she's just a really good example of the Posy program.
What Lani writes, I don't know, you guys should all read her book.
Yes.
Which we have, and there's kind of make the pitch at the beginning, middle, and the end. But Lani has a whole chapter dedicated to this program as an example of how we can be thinking differently about defining this term merit. And I like to talk about the word merit because I don't know how many of you went to one of the, what we call the most selective colleges in the United States, but there's over 1,400 four-year colleges in the United States. If you took just the top 10%, right, the ones that everyone's heard about, the Ivy League schools and Vanderbilt, Northwestern, and Duke, and these kinds of schools, Middlebury, they still rely pretty heavily on the SAT as a way of deciding who's going to be admitted, right? You're familiar, you know this idea. But in 2015, it's still white and Asian kids that are scoring the best on those tests. Now, we could talk about all the problems and why that is the case. But here's a kid like Shirley, and I just want to jump on your story a little bit. Shirley grew up in Brooklyn. She's a Dominican kid who got 800 combined, I'm letting this sink in, combined on the math and reading sections of the SAT. She lets us say this, combined. She never in a million years would have gotten into Vanderbilt. We get her into Vanderbilt. She graduates with honors. She gets her doctorate in clinical psychology from Duke. She becomes the dean of the college at Middlebury. And within the next 5 years, I think she's going to be a college president. Today, those schools that I mentioned, 88% of the presidents of those schools are white men. If you look at who's in the US Senate, 94% of our Senate is white. Most are men. The same thing with who runs Fortune 500 companies. White guys, mostly. And their Section 16 executives, white. So what we're talking about is, well, how do we keep going like that, right, Lani? Because if we keep doing that in a country where the demographics are changing radically, and within the next 30 years, white Hispanics will be the minority, no longer be the majority. We're not going to have a country that's representative of its people. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how these why it's important for the elite schools. Why do you think, and why should they be focused on thinking differently about who deserves to be on their campuses?
So just to put what you're saying into a slightly larger context, and I definitely want to follow up what you're saying, is the book that I'm describing, or that actually you've done a great job of describing, is really about what do we mean by merit. And so it's a larger question than just who is benefiting from the concept of merit. But we tend to think of merit as something that measures how well you do on a particular test at a particular moment. And what I am trying to do in this book, and what I think is consistent with what the Posy program does, is to give people another way of identifying with and exhibiting merit. And that is working together in groups, in posses, that can look at a problem from different perspectives, and as a result, work together to solve that problem. And adding to your comment about the number of men versus women, and finding more women in who are going to college and who are graduating, because it turns out that the women are better at collaborating with each other than the men. There's a study by a woman named Anita Woolley, who, in fact, I think was working with MIT at the same time she was doing this study. And what they were trying to find out is who was leading the conversation and what groups were most effective in solving the particular problems that were presented before the groups. And it turned out that the more women you had in the group, the better the group was at solving the problem, up to 85%. Once you had 85% women, it was fine to bring in the men. They would not be a complete distraction. Okay, now why would that be if we have so few women who are in positions of power, and yet those are the people who are most likely to work together, to collaborate, to solve problems? And I don't know the answer to the question of why is this true of women and not men. It may be biological, it may be cultural, there are all kinds of explanations, but it's really important that we acknowledge the value and the, quote, merit of people, disproportionately women, who can work together to solve problems. And the reason they can work together to solve problems is that they're willing to listen to each other. Whereas what many of the men do is that they immediately think of an answer and want to say the answer to everyone else. They're not really interested in what other people are saying. They're self-promoting. Not all men, but many of them. And so the point I'm trying to make, the point I'm emphasizing, is the power of collaboration and the importance in the 21st century of developing a group of college graduates who are comfortable working with other people to solve complicated problems, and who are not simply trying to dominate the conversation and demonstrate how smart they individually are, but who are willing to listen to what other people are saying, build on what those other people are saying, and create new and helpful instruments for solving these problems. One last example is a professor from the University of Michigan who also is doing work on groups, and his experience is with people who are all taking the same test. And his argument is that when you give people a test and there are 10 questions on the test, there are some people who are going to immediately answer 7 of the 10 questions and get them right. But they don't get all of the questions right. So what do they do? Our instinct is to get the people who had the 7 of the 10 questions right because they had the most questions right. And we put all of them together. That's the sort of SAT idea. You get the people who all did, quote, the best. But what if it turns out that you're overlooking 2 or 3 of the answers to questions that these quote-unquote stars got wrong, and that some people got those 3 or 2 questions right, but didn't get as many questions right as the initial group leaders, that you really want people to work together even though they only got 2 or 3 of the 10 questions right, if it turns out that they're the only ones who got those correct. So the idea is that, and I think it's very similar and very compatible with the concept of posse, is that you have to, in the 21st century, it's really important that you can work in groups, that you can, and I don't mean that work in groups and you all march together and you follow everyone. I mean work in a position where you are not the only person with ideas. You are open to other people's ideas, and you're willing to test out their ideas and see ways in which those ideas can be improved or can be...
That's very Google.
Very Google.
But Lani, can I ask, why, since I have you captive anyway, why do you think we've been so resistant to this when we admit people to these colleges? Why are we clinging to the SAT so much?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of money
Yeah.
behind the SAT and those tests. So there's a part of the population that's invested in that in terms of their livelihood. I think it's the idea that you can reduce people's intelligence and you can reduce people's ability to the performance
score.
Yeah, on a single test, right? It's not like you get a chance to do this test
Yeah.
every month for a year.
Raise your hand if you took the SAT or the ACT. Look how many of you, almost all of you. And raise your hand if you went to college. And raise your hand if someone said to you, what was your score? Do you remember that? And raise your hand if you're willing to tell us your score right now. Exactly. A couple. A lot less hands. Because we still feel like it reflects. There's a judgment that we're going to make about you if we hear your score. That's terrible. We shouldn't make that judgment about you right now. And look how old you are.
Well, so can I just hang a footnote to what you're saying, and then
Yeah. No. Yes.
No, so I have to tell you, it's a personal story. When I was admitted to Radcliffe College of Harvard
Oh, this is
University.
a good story. in your end part, yeah. I love the story.
So my father who was born in Jamaica, in the West Indies. He came to the United States. He went to Boston English High School. He then applied to Harvard. He was admitted to Harvard College, except that they didn't realize he was black. They didn't have that kind of photography or whatever.
No photo included, or
that was his mistake, quote unquote, because he showed up, and once they saw him, they said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do with you?" So they admitted him, since they had already admitted him, but they wouldn't allow him to live in the dormitory. They wouldn't allow him to eat in the dining halls with the other students. And the first person to, well, there are a number of people, but the people he knew from Boston English High School, where he had been, the chair of the newspaper and had done very well, and who were his friends, those people were very friendly when he was at Boston English High School, but once he was at Harvard College, they wouldn't talk to him either. So I'm saying that because for me, he felt it was important that I go to Harvard, right? Test it out, see if they've improved in the past 40 years. But it was also in many ways this, what I felt was a painful experience. That is my roommate. I believe that's what you're talking about. So my roommate comes into my dorm room the first day of class, and she starts telling me about herself, and she explained that she was very worried that she would never get married. And I'm thinking, this is a very odd conversation, right? This is the first day of college. I'm 17 years old. I am definitely not thinking about who I might marry. But she was using this as an opportunity to brag about her test scores, because it turns out she had gotten perfect 800s on her SATs. So that was her announcement to me, and I was therefore, I should be observant of her and learn from her. And what I learned was to move to another dorm room.
But what she means, and what other people would be really impressed, is that she's smart. We equate that test score with intelligence. And when we use the word merit in higher ed, and we give out merit scholarships, we give them to the kids with the highest test scores. Because if you look the word merit up in the dictionary, it means deserve. Who deserves to be at Harvard? Who deserves to be at Cornell? Who deserves to be at Vanderbilt? The kids with the highest scores, because they're the smartest. It's that simple. But because white and Asian kids are still scoring the best, they deserve to be at these schools more than black and Asian kids, than poor kids who don't score as well. There's an amazing stat that I know you're going to love this stat.
Okay.
The top 150 schools in the United States would need 50,000 black students every year going into their freshman class, their first year class, if they were going to reflect the percentage of blacks that exist in the American population. But only 9,000 black kids scored 1,200 or above on the math and verbal sections of the SAT last year.
9,000 in the entire country?
In the entire United States. If we continue to rely too heavily on the SAT, we'll never get the kind of reflective diversity that we want on our campuses. And if we continue to define merit so narrowly that it only relates to the test score, we're basically going to say a certain slice of the demographic deserves to be on our campuses. The others, we'll create charity programs for. At-risk, poor kids, underrepresented, needy, underprivileged, we've got programs for them. And when you do that, you divide the community. You create a campus community that says, these kids deserve to be here, and then out of the kindness of our hearts, we're bringing in the rest of you. And that's very dangerous for this country. Kids with high scores, of course, deserve. Of course. But they're not the only kids that deserve. And so I feel like what we have an opportunity to do together is say, here's the theory and the analysis behind it. And here's one example of a program that puts into practice this other way of finding talent. And think about how Google is a company that thinks outside the box, that you're all about that, right? You need people who are creative thinkers, who think differently. And you want to put teams together, right? Don't you guys believe in working in teams a lot, or is that just what I'm imagining? You do, right? The teams are more fun, they're more dynamic, they're sillier, but you come up with great ideas that way, where if you were working by yourself only, it would happen in a different way, less often. So Posy says, there was a kid who dropped out of college. He said, I never would have dropped out if I had my posse with me. This kid was super smart, great SAT scores, by the way, got into an Ivy League, but dropped out because of the culture shock, because he didn't see anybody like him. The posse created a support system, but then we began to look at these other indicators. And I bet if anybody, is anyone here responsible for hiring people? What's your name? Ryan? Brian, so you don't only care about a test score now. You look for other things. You look for grit. You look for leadership ability. You look for analytical ability, problem-solving skills, ability to work well in a team, collaborate. Like I can go on, right? Aren't you looking for all those things? Yes. So right, I'm not saying the whole list. When these kids are 17 years old, they're nominated to Posse. And I wish I could stand up. I always want to stand up. But we can put them in a room like, no, because the camera and the whole thing. But imagine a room like this with no furniture, and 100 kids from Boston come into this room. They've been nominated by someone who believes in them. And the person who believes in them says, this kid might not have the best score, but I know her. She's amazing. She could kick ass at a school like Union. They walk in, and for 3 hours, and Brian, I think you would love this if we did it at Google. Those 100 kids get put through a series of activities. They're building robots out of Legos. They're running a discussion in small groups on genetic testing. Quick, you have 4 minutes, run a discussion. They're creating a public service announcement that they have to present in front of you, and we're watching them and looking for these, what I don't like this term, but people call non-cognitive traits. They're cognitive, but I'm just, anyway. And we find the standout kids, the dynamic kids, the kids who think creatively, the kids who work well in teams, the kids who are leaders, who have ambition and drive and motivation and all of that. That's our first slice of the pie, not just, we don't even look at the test score yet. We'll look at that later. That's one way of finding talent, kids who are amazing, kids who deserve to have a shot at the American dream. And so we're putting into practice this idea that you shouldn't define merit so narrowly.
I think that's a great example. I'm also thinking of some of the TV shows where you can see black kids walking across the terrain in front of the projects. And in one of these shows, there were two brothers who were talking about the amount of marijuana that they had each sold that particular day and how much money they had made. And the younger one was computing in his head how much he had sold and how much he had benefited from the sale. And his older brother was just amazed because the younger brother, who was in the 4th grade or 5th grade, was not doing well in math. And yet he's doing this in his head. And so the older brother says, how come you're failing math? And he said, because I don't really care what the outcome is in math, but I care in terms of selling these drugs that if I get it wrong, they're going to kill me. Right? So there's a talent there, but it's not being developed in the right format.
Mm-hmm. So we have like a few more minutes to talk, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Okay.
And I thought maybe it would also be interesting to hear a little bit more about how you think these higher ed institutions can change, what you think they can do.
Well, this is an opportunity for me to cry because I've been trying to get institutions where I teach to at least address, they don't necessarily have to cure, but at least address the issues that we've been discussing. Now, I've been at law schools, not at elementary schools or at quote-unquote colleges. But what I did find, and this is not about class as much as it is about gender, the people at both law schools that I was associated or have been associated with, both at UPenn and at Harvard, there are more men than women in the school. The men outperform the women, although the women come into the school with very similar criteria as the men in terms of their LSAT scores and their undergraduate GPA. In fact, the women have slightly higher undergraduate GPA, men have slightly higher LSAT scores, but they're statistically not significant. And yet the women, when they come to law school, these are considered important and difficult to get into law schools. The women have the LSAT scores that would presumably predict that they're going to do better in law school, but they don't do as well as the men in law school. So the LSAT is predicting about 14% of the variance in first-year classes. This was at Penn, and 15% of the variance in second year, which means that 85% of the time the LSAT was wrong. Wrong. W-R-O-N-G.
So what's going on then?
The LSAT is not a good predictor. It tells you how well somebody is at answering certain questions under a lot of stress, but that doesn't mean you're going to be a good lawyer, and it doesn't mean you're going to be a good law student either. So if 85% of the time you are wrong in terms of the correlation between your LSAT scores and your performance, we need to reconsider what we're considering quote-unquote merit. And
so what should they do? If you could press the button and Harvard and Yale and Princeton would change, how would they change?
Well, okay, the answer to that is a long one because they'd have to change the culture. It's not enough just to change the score, because you could say, oh, well, they could say if you pass the LSAT, that's enough. You don't have to have a higher LSAT, since the distinction in your LSAT score really is not very predictive. So, I mean, so the LSAT could be a floor. That is, you have to get above that floor. Even if you're right above it, that's fine. We're not going to compare you to people who are doing a lot better, because I could show you scatter plots, et cetera, where you see people who had really high LSAT scores and really low law school grades.
I mean, my guess, Lani, is that people listening to you, I have this sense, know or are wondering if maybe those scores would be more predictive if culture was different on these campuses. That I, as a woman, I get a high score and I go to Harvard, but because the culture is a certain way, my performance is affected.
But
I don't know.
But this is true for men and women in terms of the LSAT
Oh,
not
it
being
is?
a good
Oh, okay.
predictor of performance. So becoming a man is not going to help you in terms of doing better at law schools. But what I really wanted to get back to, which is what Posy is well known for, is the power of working with other people, collaborating and building trust among that group of people, each of whom is bringing something new, something different, something potentially important to the group. And so the challenge is, are you in a position to take advantage of what the various people in this room or in a particular group have to offer? Or are you one of these people who has to dominate the conversation, has to show how smart you are, and has to take charge in which you're leading and everyone is just following? That can be very boring, whereas and also not very effective. Whereas if we had a culture shift, not just a rule shift, meaning a culture shift that says, the way we think merit, and Amartya Sen has a definition of merit. Merit is an incentive system that rewards actions a society values. An incentive system that rewards actions a society values. Well, what are maybe the actions that we value are not how well you do on the test, but how well you do in solving the real problems of the world. And that you alone are not going to be able to do that, but if you find the right posse, you find the right group of people, each of whom has something to offer, then you're in a position to start really solving difficult problems. And it's not that you alone are going to solve them, and it may not be that even the group you're part of alone is going to solve the problem, but you're introducing interventions that invite and excite other people who then build on what you've done, and through that process, I think we'll be in much better shape. By contrast, what we have right now, at least in college admission and college graduation, is competition as to who
does the best.
Who's doing the best, that is, whose school is admitting the students with the highest LSAT scores, and then whose schools are graduating the people who go and make the most money. And then the idea of the contribution to society, the commitment to democracy, the commitment to making sure that as a democracy, we want to make sure everybody, as many people as possible, are educated, because we never know among those people who's going to really contribute something unique and something that's brave and something that really works. We don't have a good predictor of that outcome through the LSAT, the SAT, the GRE, none of those. What those tests tend to tell us is what kind of car your parents drive, meaning they have enough money to buy a Mercedes, so you've obviously been able to do well on this test because they've also bought people who are going to help you to get prepared for the test. And then, of course, when you're writing out your admissions data, you also get somebody else who writes it for you. And right, they're working on your behalf, presumably, but they're not going to be there when you're in college and you have an exam or something else to do that you're really not prepared for, because the way you got there was somebody else was pushing you or function as a pedestal on which you could stand. So I'm saying all of this because I think that the Posy program is wonderful, not just because it's bringing together students from working class families, but because it's also giving us the opportunity to see how teams can be created and built in ways that not only give people who are part of the team confidence, but give the people who benefit from the outcome of the work of the team some sense that life is better with the interventions.
I'm going to use that as a quote in our next. That's good. Good. It was good. So should we
Yes.
turn? to you guys? Because you have a million questions, I'm sure.
I hope not a million, but
We'll start at the beginning.
Okay, so it sounds like the population that you're most concerned with are the students that are both minorities and talented. And I guess my brother is now applying to colleges. He's just deciding where he's going. So I've been kind of like hearing a lot about this lately. And I have questions about the population who is either talented but not diverse, not minority, and the population that is maybe not so talented. So I guess my two kind of situations are that I've seen that are kind of like concerning. One is, say, a friend of mine who's white guy, in engineering, really smart, and is really struggling to get into schools.
He can't get into school.
And he feels like that, there are a lot of spots that are reserved for people of other categories, and he's a really smart white guy and is just really struggling to kind of get noticed because he doesn't have anything special. And in this particular case, yes, his parents went to college, community college, not really super academic kind of people. He wasn't from, a Mercedes driving kind of family, didn't really get the support and the motivation and everything, but he feels like because he's white, it doesn't really count for anything. So that's kind of the one situation of talented but not minority. And the other situation that I see are people who are really not interested in pursuing academic careers. I actually was a serious ballet dancer, and a lot of my friends didn't go to college because if you want to be a ballet dancer, why would you spend $160,000 on a college education? It doesn't make any sense.
Or more.
More, yeah. So what about for those people who want to, or they want to pursue culinary arts, or they want to do whatever else that doesn't depend on getting a college education, where they feel like they're being pressured to spend a fortune and go into debt to get an education that maybe they could have an excellent professional career doing the things that they want with another path that's somehow looked down upon. Mm-hmm. So I guess, what are your thoughts on people in those two situations?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me?
Either way, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So first, I think you should go to Canada. You don't have to stay, just visit and see the way in which they admit people to their schools. If you have a grade point average of over 80%, you're automatically admitted to one of their colleges. And I don't know that you're entitled to your first choice, but they try and give you at least one of your first three choices. And I don't believe college is free, but it's not very expensive. So that would solve a lot of the problems that you're talking about. The other point that you're making, though, I think is really important, and that is that people are coming to college and they're really not there to learn. They're there to promote themselves into another sphere where they'll be making a lot of money. So, for example, in the Harvard Crimson of about 5 or so years ago, they had an article called "Show Him the Money." That was the front page of the Harvard Crimson. That's the newspaper the students publish. And what they were commenting on, they had done a survey of the graduating class. This was in May of that year. And the survey noted that the men from Harvard wanted to go to Wall Street because they wanted to make a lot of money. And the women wanted to become lawyers or doctors or teachers. And the people who were writing this article were making fun of the women who wanted to do good, because they should have been trying to get the money. And it suggests that's why I say you need a culture shift. It's not just that you have a certain group of people and not another group of people. It's that the culture of higher education has lost some of its connection to the promoting democracy and the importance of civic involvement that is the basis of many of the colleges in this country. It's the reason that they were created, and yet they've been shifted from an engine of democracy to an engine of plutocracy.
And Lani, I think there, can you help me answer this also? I have an idea formulated, because behind what you're saying is a question that I've heard a lot of times from white people whose kids are applying to college, and they're worried that the black kid is going to take the spot that their kid should get. And I'm not saying this is your question, but I hear it kind of, and I hear that question a lot. There's a black kid in my daughter's school, and she didn't score as well as my daughter did on the SAT. And I know she's going to get into X school, and my daughter deserves to be at that school. And there is resentment that builds. How are you supposed to think about that? How does the country think about that? It is very difficult for us to understand that the numbers of black kids going to these elite institutions is very small. And 10 extra or 20 extra kids that get inserted into that freshman class, even if they didn't have the test score, is not the effect it has on the number of white students applying and their chances of getting in is minuscule. But it feels big because we all know of a black kid who gets in with a lower score. It's this problem of using the score to define deserving. Anyone in this room and listening and online and all of that who thinks that college admissions is an objective process is wrong. It's completely subjective. The dean of admissions says, we need a violinist. Let's try and find a great violinist for our orchestra. This year, we need more kids who want to major in our new curriculum in communications. Mm-hmm. It's just about building a class. But we're so competitive, and we compete against our friends and our kids' friends and our parents' friends, all of this stuff, that we end up resenting the black kid who got in with the lower score. It's a big problem, and I don't know how to articulate it more, but yeah.
No, I think you've articulated it very effectively. The question is, what's the intervention?
How do we change our mindset, almost?
Well, I think we have to go back to understanding what's the purpose of higher education.
Yeah.
And it's not there simply to give your child or my child an opportunity to make a lot of money. Right. It's also a very important engine of democracy. And that's the part of the college that we don't really talk about, that we want students who are going to graduate from college and make a contribution to our society that promotes democracy. And by democracy, I mean fairness. I mean engagement of the citizenry in making decisions that affect their lives and our lives. That college is not just a platform for becoming a millionaire or continuing in your parents' footsteps and being a person, from...
A great way of framing it. Thank you.
Are you okay with somewhat more of a comment than a question?
No, absolutely not. You need to sit down. No, just kidding, kidding.
I see the essence of what you're saying as three areas. One is scoring people based on some perceived ability being done badly, and the alternative is over-credentialism. You have a degree, therefore you must be qualified to do an entire class of work unrelated to the degree. There's the diversity aspect, where you're clearly losing the game if you're not getting included in the solution, and someone else is disproportionately winning the game. But my pet peeve is the posse versus singular model of it. Survival of the fittest is universally accepted as the driver of evolution. That if you have someone who keeps his tribe alive by sacrificing himself or herself, then that person's genes aren't being carried down directly, and therefore clearly that person was a failure. But if you look at how evolution actually works, the tribe succeeds, the tribe survives because one person was willing to sacrifice for the group's success. And that strikes me as an almost direct
Conflict of,
it's very much the issue of you have 5 people who are very good each at one science and none of them can get along. You add a 6th person who gets people along with each other, and finally the team can succeed rather than being a bunch of individuals. Even for leadership, which is one of the aspects we consider in recruitment, it is hierarchical sort of leadership we look at. It is not management of a group to make the group effective. It is domination of the group in order to make the group do what it's told. And I feel like that is not just some people are winning and other people are losing, but our consensus as a society seems to be on the wrong rules of physics, you might say, about how these things work. And I feel like that is an understanding that needs to be spread. And I'm glad you're doing it.
Oh, well, I'm glad you just came up and made what I thought was a very powerful argument. So thank you.
So I have just enough personal experience, not nearly as much as either or both of yours, to be dangerous in this. Meaning, I had a daughter who went through the process this year, and I'm a regional enrollment director for my alma mater. Okay, so I see a lot of really scary numbers and things, experiences happen from both the applicant perspective and the alumni perspective. So my view is the entire process is, of getting into colleges and going through colleges is completely broken for everybody, regardless of what your socioeconomic, racial, gender class is. It's 100% broken for everybody. And somebody has to do something drastic soon to take a leadership role in changing it. But because institutions exist to continue to exist, it's happening way too slowly. So I'm going to tell you an idea I sent to our admissions director at our campus this spring that I think after his eyes and ears got done bleeding after he read the idea, he sent me a politically correct note back. Okay. But my idea was, because there's all these colleges are keeping score too on any number of
rankings.
rankings, number of applications, yields, acceptance. It's all there's all kinds of scorecards. I said my recommendation is next year we have no applications. There is no application process. The process is
Random enrollment.
well, not exactly. You take your admissions officers who spend time reading too many applications and delivering on the admission director's need for the communications class or the violinist, and they just go out into the community, and they find the
Brilliant.
right 1,200 people for you. Okay, why don't we do that? Someone's got to be first. And so my question for you is anybody close to being first with anything that matters in this? I mean, the closest thing I see to this is maybe what's happening in technology with edX and things like that, but they are still premium institutions and they haven't figured out how to commercialize it. But is anybody doing anything material to be first at this and start to change it?
I mean, I have some things. I love what you're saying, because you're saying we have to be radical. It's not enough this little, small, Lani, who's a civil rights expert and witnessed the progress we made, is also witnessing, as we all are, how we are moving backwards. We strike down the Voting Rights Act and we lose affirmative action, and we think because we're there, we've solved the problem. We have a black president, done. But so we need to be more radical because we move away too slowly, as you're saying. So MOOCs have evolved. Higher ed is going to change. We call it sometimes the higher ed bubble. Remember, we had these other technology bubbles and stuff, but it's going to burst. People will not be able to afford this kind of higher education within the next, I don't know how many years. The schools can't afford it. We can't afford it. Something's going to change. I just wanted to mention, this is not supposed to be about Posy. I wanted to mention that this year we had 15,000 nominations from all over the United States for 700 slots. And every one of those 15,000 kids came from someone who said, this is a great kid, he should be going to this great school. Someone who believes in this kid and knows this kid. Frankly, in my opinion, all 15,000 of those kids should be sent to these great schools. Nothing would happen that's bad. It would only be good. But those 15,000 kids came into a room that was radically different. It wasn't about scores and grades and tests. It was about all of these other qualities that we think could make a great student on a campus and a great leader in the workforce. If we could do more of that, replicate these large group interviews, these large group opportunities for companies like Google to hire, for schools like Vanderbilt to admit students, for whatever it is that we're looking for, it gives us another way of finding talent that's more radical, because it's not just sitting in a room and looking at a piece of paper and making a decision. I know we're running out of time because we have 3 minutes. But I love that, and there are things that are happening, and I just think we need to keep pushing it really loudly, that we should radically change the system. Or it'll just break, like you said, and then we will have no choice.
We cannot end on that note.
No.
So please ask a question.
I'll be real fast because of time. Meritocracy rests on a bedrock of scarcity. We can only enlist X many people each year, so how do we pick? And you make good points about changing the metric, but you also mentioned, if I change the metric, then some other people who might have otherwise deserved don't get to go. The other way to approach that problem is to drastically increase the number of people who are able to go. So what are your thoughts about changing that restriction of the small number of people who are kind of able to go to college?
That's positive.
Yeah, I agree with you.
MOOCs might be able to make that happen. You know, we may be able to create more systems that take more kids.
Well, go to Canada and see what they do.
Canada again.
No. Because if you have 80% or above in terms of your high school grades, you're entitled to go to college in Canada. They've figured that out.
Right. My kids are not Canadian. All right. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old.
A 9-year-old and a 6-year-old?
Yeah, I've done the math.
I'm glad they're not getting into college at this age.
Well,
That
but I
would
have to
be
start financially planning for that now because it's going to cost me $500,000 to send them. And how do we solve that problem?
Right.
You know what I mean? But that's part of what I'm saying. Literacy is so important that we give it away for free.
That's why I'm saying go to Canada.
No. You know what? I think what you're hearing is that we can't, it's not an answerable question right now. You're right. We need everybody to feel like the opportunity to reach an American dream, whatever that dream is, exists. And it feels unbelievably unfair.
Right.
We're living in a country that has 33% of its population living in poverty or what we call near poverty. 33%. Those kids, we don't even talk about them. Do you read about the poverty that exists in the United States? You don't really. And so we need to talk about it. The middle class has gotten squeezed out of education because the cost is so enormous. So we end up with schools that we call rich-poor schools. The rich kids can go, and the really poor kids can get these scholarships. It's not enough, and we need to find a way to make state systems work for everybody, to make great schools expand what they offer to more people. We haven't figured it out. You're right, we have to figure it out. And maybe by the time your kids are older, there'll be something great.
But it's not just, and I think what you just said was great, but it's not.
It's too negative.
No, but it's something that we have.
Yeah.
We don't have the capacity to solve that problem alone, but it's an issue that's why I keep talking about Canada, or you should go to Finland or to other countries and see that in these other countries, they are committed to making sure every student.
To use them as models
Yeah.
for something we could copy. Yeah.
Right, if we think we're in a position of greatness, we need to go and actually see greatness that is democratic as opposed to plutocratic, which is what we have here.
So we said that test scores are not predictive of college success, but you have this Posy selection process. Is that predictive?
Yeah, so I didn't say they're not predictive. Test scores, yeah, they're limited. They predict for some kids. And the only thing that SATs predict is how well you're going to do your first year in college, what your GPA will be. And it doesn't, again, it's like Lani said, it's incredibly flawed, but it finds some great kids. Posy kids graduate at rates of over 90% from 52 colleges and universities that we send them to. Thousands of Posse kids have won, $800 million in scholarships over the past 25 years. So we've got a program that's showing that what Lani's talking about totally works, right? We've got thousands of kids in an experiment, and this other way of identifying talent is just as good as the SAT. All I'm saying is we can't just only use the SAT. We need many more ways of finding great kids. And then the cost is another issue. Yeah. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. Lani, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, everybody.